Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in everyone's life when everything around them begins to unravel. The pressure builds, emotions surge, the noise grows louder, and in that chaos, most people react. They shout back, they collapse under the weight, they lose their cool and their clarity at the same time. But a few, just a few, respond differently. They don't react to the storm. They center themselves inside it. They don't panic when everything feels urgent. They pause. They don't look for control on the outside. They build it within. This isn't luck. It's not natural talent. It's the result of something deeper, mental training, emotional discipline, and the courage to lead the hardest person you'll ever lead yourself. Today isn't about pretending to be calm. It's about understanding how calm is created. It's about why strong minds don't break in the heat. Because they've been forged in it. Let me ask you something simple, yet difficult. When everything falls apart around you, what's your first response? Is it panic, anger, confusion, or do you pause? Do you breathe? Because here's the truth. Our greatest strength doesn't show up when everything is easy. It shows up in the moment when everything could go wrong and we still choose peace. Calm isn't weakness. It's a skill. It's not passive. It's powerful. And the reason it's so rare is because very few people train for it. We train for careers. We train for sports. We even train our bodies to endure more pain, more stress, more weight. But when was the last time you trained your mind to stay still when it's under fire? The truth is, life won't always be fair. People won't always be kind. Situations won't always favor you. But your mind, that's yours. And when you learn to lead it, instead of letting it lead you, you become dangerous in the best possible way. Because now, you're no longer reacting, you're responding. You're not acting out of fear, you're acting out of clarity. You don't train your mind for the good days. You train for the days when the pressure is high and the path isn't clear. You train so that in the middle of conflict, you don't lose your voice. You train so that when someone criticizes you, you don't crumble. You train so that when everything feels out of control, you don't. When you stay calm, you stay in control. You can't control people. You can't control outcomes. But you can control your internal state, and that is where your true power lies. And no, this doesn't happen overnight. Mastery doesn't come from reading quotes or listening to podcasts. It comes from showing up again and again when your mind wants to spiral and you choose stillness instead. It comes from sitting in discomfort without rushing to escape, from breathing through the tension instead of reacting to it. This is how strong minds are built, not by accident, but by choice. Every time you pause instead of panic, your brain rewires. Every time you respond instead of react, your spirit strengthens. Every time you choose awareness over impulse, you build inner leadership. And let's be clear, calm doesn't mean silence. Calm means clarity. It means you don't speak from heat. You speak from truth. It means you don't suppress your emotions. You steward them. Because you've learned that not every feeling deserves your voice, and not every trigger deserves your attention. Solitude becomes your greatest training ground because in solitude, no one's watching. In solitude, your performance ends and your real process begins. That's where you notice your patterns. That's where you face your restlessness. That's where you learn to separate your thoughts from who you are. A trained mind doesn't avoid hard things. It just doesn't let fear drive the car anymore. It sees anxiety for what it is, and an invitation to breathe deeper. It sees stress not as a threat, but as a test, not of your strength, but of your discipline, of your consistency, of your mindset. In a noisy world, the calm mind becomes rare, and rare becomes valuable. And when you're that person who stays grounded while others rush to judgment, you become a leader. Whether you're leading a company, a family, or just your own life, train your mind not to avoid the fire, but to walk through it without burning. Train your mind not to fight chaos with chaos, but to hold peace like a weapon. Train your mind not to escape stress, but to anchor in it with purpose. Because at the end of the day, the calmest person in the room always has the most power, not because they talk the most, but because they listen the deepest, not because they never feel fear, but because they're not ruled by it. That is the kind of power you don't get from chance. You build it brick by brick, breath by breath, thought by thought. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, stop, breathe, step back. And remember, this moment isn't happening to you. It's happening for your training. Let it teach you. Let it sharpen you. Let it make you unshakable. There's a common misconception that emotional strength means never feeling anything deeply. That to be unbothered is to be cold, or emotionally distant, or disconnected from the world. But emotional mastery is not the absence of emotion. It's the ability to direct it, to understand it, to stand in the middle of a storm and still choose your response with intention. It's the difference between reacting and leading. We all carry stories that try to control our reactions. Past moments, buried pain, unresolved experiences that whisper in our ears when we feel threatened or unseen. That whisper says defend, strike, withdraw, or chase validation. But training the mind to stay cool doesn't mean silencing the whisper. It means turning toward it, recognizing its source, and deciding whether it gets to steer your next move. This is where emotional intelligence begins, not in avoiding emotion, but in understanding its origin and using that understanding to build something healthier. When we're triggered, our brain seeks familiarity. It tries to protect us with the oldest data it has previous experiences. But if we're not careful, that old data becomes a lens that distorts the present. A trained mind doesn't just ask, "What am I feeling?" It also asks, "Is this feeling true to this moment, or is it a shadow of the past?" That pause alone can change everything. Think about the moments when you felt misunderstood. The instinct might be to explain, defend, or even lash out. But emotional mastery asks a different question. What do I actually need in this moment? Is it to be right, or is it to stay rooted in who I am? The strongest people aren't those who win arguments. They're the ones who can stay calm in them, because they understand that their peace is worth more than their pride. Training the mind is not about self-denial. It's about self-respect. It's about honoring your emotional life without being ruled by it. You can feel deeply and still remain grounded. You can care passionately and still choose clarity over chaos. The world doesn't need more emotionally numb people. It needs emotionally strong ones, people who can walk into complex situations and not add to the fire, but cool it with wisdom, presence, and steady energy. This doesn't happen by accident. Just like you don't build muscle without resistance, you don't build emotional strength without challenge. Every moment of discomfort is a classroom. Every heated conversation is an opportunity to practice. Every time you choose not to escalate, even when it feels justified, you train your mind to lead instead of follow its reflexes. And leadership starts with the self. If you can't lead yourself through stress, you can't expect others to trust your calm. When emotions are high, your body wants to act fast. But your mind, when trained, slows things down. It reminds you that urgency is often the enemy of clarity, that silence is not weakness, it's power gathering, and that the space between stimulus and response is where wisdom lives. We often forget that we have this space. We let the rush of adrenaline take over. We raise our voices, slam doors, send texts we later regret, all because we didn't pause long enough to ask, what's really happening here? What part of me feels threatened? What story am I telling myself right now? A trained mind turns curiosity inward. It looks at emotion as a message, not a command. And when we become better interpreters of those messages, we become better human beings. Training your mind to stay cool isn't about being unaffected. It's about being effective. When you can think clearly under pressure, you become a stabilizing force for others. You become someone who creates safety even in chaos, and people gravitate toward that. Because in a world that often rewards noise, clarity becomes rare, and rare becomes valuable. But clarity comes from calm, and calm comes from practice. You don't suddenly become composed under pressure. You become composed because you've walked through moments of tension and chosen not to be consumed by them. You've learned to stay with discomfort long enough for it to teach you, instead of trying to escape it through anger or avoidance. You've realized that emotional strength isn't found in how you express power, but in how you control it. Too often, we confuse stillness with stagnation, but stillness is where all great decisions begin. It's in the quiet moments, the slow breaths, the spaces where you step back from the heat and ask better questions. That's where wisdom grows. That's where patterns break. That's where emotional maturity develops. And the more time you spend in that space, the more second nature it becomes. There's an old saying that when the pressure rises, we don't rise to the occasion. We fall to the level of our training. And that training doesn't begin in the heat of the moment. It begins in the ordinary, unnoticed moments when you catch yourself mid-thought and choose a better one. when you feel the impulse to react and instead you reflect. When you sit in solitude not to escape, but to strengthen. The mind is not a problem to be fixed. It's a muscle to be trained. And just like physical strength is built through resistance, mental strength is built through pressure. The goal isn't to avoid emotion. The goal is to be so familiar with your emotions that they no longer control you. You become the observer, not the reactor. You become the steward, not the slave. You lead your emotions instead of letting them lead you. And this leadership ripples outward. When your calm becomes consistent, people notice. They may not always understand it, but they feel safer around it. They trust you more, not because you're perfect, but because you're present. Present enough to stay composed, honest enough to admit when you're triggered, and wise enough to respond instead of explode. The greatest advantage in today's world isn't knowledge, it's emotional discipline. Because no matter how smart you are, if you can't manage yourself, you'll struggle to manage anything else. Emotional mastery is what separates the people who build from the ones who break, the ones who bring peace from the ones who bring chaos, the ones who change environments by their presence, not by their pressure. So train your mind, not to feel less, but to lead more. Train it to pause, to breathe, to reflect. Train it to see emotion not as something to fear, but something to guide. Because when the mind is trained, the heart feels safe. And when the heart is safe, the world around you changes. Most people prepare for success by building skills, gathering knowledge, and setting goals. But very few prepare for pressure, and that's the difference between those who thrive in high-stakes moments and those who crumble. You don't rise to the level of pressure, you fall to the level of your training. And pressure, unlike knowledge or talent, is not theoretical. It's lived. It's embodied. It presses on your chest, accelerates your thoughts, and tightens your breath. The only way to handle it is to become stronger than it. Pressure doesn't warn you before it arrives. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It shows up during the argument, the decision, the failure, the loss. It interrupts your comfort zone and exposes your preparation. What you do next isn't about your talent. It's about your conditioning. It's about the mental reps you've done long before this moment when no one was watching and nothing was at stake. That's why cool minds aren't born. They're built. They're built through repetition, through disciplined thinking, through practicing how to respond when every instinct tells you to react, when you get cut off in traffic, when someone criticizes you unfairly, when plans fall apart. Those are not interruptions. They're training sessions. Every difficult moment offers a chance to rehearse calm. Not fake peace, but real emotional presence under fire. High performers understand this. They know that greatness isn't found in bursts of energy. It's in repeated acts of control, not suppression, not denial, control. The ability to hold space between what you feel and what you do. They train so they can default to clarity under stress. Because in pressure-filled environments, there's no time to start building character. You either have it or you don't. And if you don't, you become reactive. You fall into habits. You speak without thinking. You decide out of fear. And fear is never a great advisor. Think of a firefighter in a burning building. Their heart rate rises just like yours would. But their training kicks in. They don't let panic take the wheel. They rely on muscle memory, breathing techniques, visual, scanning, mental rehearsal. They've practiced for chaos so they can serve in it. The same principle applies to your mind. If you want to be calm when things are burning down, you have to build that stillness before the fire comes. And you don't need extreme environments to train this. Life gives you more than enough practice rounds. The email that frustrates you, the delay in traffic, the unexpected bill, the missed opportunity, all of them are pressure points. All of them offer you a choice: react with heat or respond with intention. That choice builds or weakens you, moment by moment. No gym membership required, just awareness. In these moments, stillness becomes a secret weapon. Not absence of movement, but presence of mind. When everything around you is loud, stillness listens. When others rush to conclusions, stillness asks better questions. When the situation escalates, stillness stays grounded. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough to stay composed. It means you choose to hold the space instead of feeding the chaos. Stillness is often misunderstood. People think calm means detached. That's not calm, that's avoidance. Real stillness feels. It just doesn't panic. It sees clearly. It notices what's happening internally without being pulled into the drama externally. That clarity becomes strength, and over time it becomes trust. People trust those who stay grounded when everyone else is spinning, because consistency builds safety, and safety builds influence. There's a difference between reacting and responding. Reaction is automatic, it's fast, it's driven by emotion and often regret. Response is deliberate, it's thoughtful, it creates space for wisdom to enter. Stillness is the foundation for response. It's not passive, it's patient. It says, let me see the full picture before I act. Let me observe, reflect, and then decide, not out of fear, but from clarity. You cannot access clarity in the middle of noise unless you've practiced silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of self-awareness. It's stepping back from the mental chatter and saying, what's really happening here? That's why solitude is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Because solitude trains stillness. It reveals the conversations you've been avoiding. It shows you how loud your mind has become. And once you notice that noise, you can start learning how to quiet it. Leadership, in any context, demands this kind of stillness. Whether you lead a team, a family, or just your own path, your ability to stay calm will often set the emotional tone for others. If you bring peace into a tense room, you don't have to say much. Your presence speaks for you. Your non-reactivity becomes contagious. And over time, people begin to mirror your behavior. Stillness under pressure builds emotional authority. It earns respect without demanding it. It creates influence without using force. And that kind of leadership is rare. Most people want to be heard so badly that they speak before they think. But those who pause first are heard deepest. Because when you speak from calm, your words carry weight. Not because you're louder, but because you've earned the right to be listened to. None of this is easy. And it's not always immediate. You will fail. You'll overact. You'll get triggered. But if you can see each failure not as a setback, but as feedback, you grow. You learn. You evolve. You adjust your habits. You try again, slower this time, with more presence and less urgency. Eventually, you realize that your environment doesn't decide your peace. You do. The most powerful people are rarely the most aggressive. They're the ones who mastered the art of staying grounded. They speak less, but mean more. They lead without shouting, they move with clarity, even when things around them move with chaos. And their stillness becomes a lighthouse for others, a quiet signal of what's possible when you stop reacting to the world and start responding to it. In every storm, there's a center of calm. Your job isn't to avoid the storm, it's to find that center, to breathe, to notice, to wait, and then, when you're ready, to act not from panic, but from poise. That's what training your mind is about. That's what real strength looks like. Solitude is often misinterpreted. To many, it feels like a void, a space they fill with noise, distraction, or avoidance. But to those who understand its purpose, solitude becomes sacred. It's where the loudness of the world fades and the quiet of the mind becomes audible. It's where clarity rises from chaos and where internal discipline begins to grow roots. Solitude isn't about escaping others. It's about returning to yourself. A mind that is constantly influenced by external voices loses its shape. It conforms. It reacts. It mirrors whatever is happening around it. But solitude provides the necessary friction to think independently. It challenges the narratives you've absorbed. It allows space for reflection, and in that reflection, you begin to see what's truly yours and what you've been carrying from others. That is where emotional strength starts. When you stop reacting to everything around you and start responding to what's going on within you. In the quiet, you meet the parts of yourself you usually outrun. The insecurities you drown out with noise. The fear you cover with business. The self-doubt you disguise with productivity. Solitude strips away the layers. It doesn't rush to fix what it finds. It simply invites you to observe it. That's the start of true mental training, observation without judgment. Because when you understand something, you stop being afraid of it. And when you stop being afraid of your own mind, you can finally begin to lead it. Leaders who are not comfortable in solitude will always seek validation. Their decisions will fluctuate with opinions. Their self-worth will rise and fall with external feedback. But those who have spent time alone, not in loneliness, but in intentional reflection, build an internal compass. They don't need to convince others. They don't need to shout. They just know. That knowing becomes a quiet power that people can feel without needing to be told. The mistake many people make is waiting until life becomes overwhelming to start seeking peace. But solitude isn't a medicine for crisis, it's preparation for it. The time you spend in stillness today prepares you for the disruption of tomorrow. Every moment you sit in silence, every breath you take intentionally, every uncomfortable thought you explore instead of avoiding, those are the reps, the mental weights, the quiets, the quiet strength built nobody sees, but everyone eventually feels. Solitude teaches restraint. It teaches you that not every emotion needs a reaction. Not every opinion needs a response. Not every situation needs your participation. And once you learn that, you become free. Free from overexposure. Free from needing to prove your worth. Free from the pressure to constantly perform. This freedom doesn't make you passive. It makes you intentional. You don't pull away from life. You simply stop letting it pull you apart. A trained mind becomes your ally when pressure hits. It doesn't argue with your fear. It recognizes it. It studies it, and then it acts anyway. That's not recklessness. That's courage. The mind, when trained, doesn't silence emotions. It organizes them. It makes space for sadness. It allows anger to inform, not control. It notices envy without becoming bitter. This emotional regulation isn't natural. It's developed. It's practiced. It's built through moments where you feel yourself slipping into old patterns. And instead of surrendering, you choose differently. That choice doesn't come from force. It comes from awareness. You can't lead a mind you haven't studied. You can't calm a storm you pretend isn't happening. A trained mind is honest, first and foremost. It tells itself the truth even when that truth is uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. Because the moment you choose truth over comfort, growth becomes inevitable. You stop asking, how do I get rid of this emotion? And start asking, what is this emotion trying to teach me? Your thoughts become tools, not threats. You begin to notice patterns. You start naming your fears. You become curious instead of critical. That shift is subtle, but life-changing. Because now, when the chaos comes, and you meet it not with confusion, but with clarity. You don't run from it. You walk into it with a mind that has already practiced peace in less turbulent times. There's an undeniable power in someone who owns their mind. Not in a boastful, rigid way, but with quiet authority. The person who can stay centered when everyone else is losing balance doesn't do so by accident. They've trained for it. They've failed through it. They've sat with themselves long enough to know where their fears lie and how to walk with them. They've separated their identity from their emotions. They know that having a feeling doesn't make it true. And that knowledge creates space to act from values, not moods. We often think we need motivation to become mentally strong, but motivation fades. What you need is routine, repeated practice, daily exposure to mental resistance, choosing mindfulness over mindlessness, choosing breath over reaction, choosing intention over impulse. That's how you build a mind that serves you, not sabotages you. And what happens when you do? The world doesn't change, but your experience of it does. Challenges remain, but you meet them with composure. Criticism comes, but you don't internalize it. Uncertainty lingers, but you're no longer afraid of not knowing, because you've trained your mind not to fear discomfort, but to welcome it as a signpost, a teacher, an invitation to deepen your strength. This isn't a one-time event. It's a lifelong process. And the more you train, the more your mind begins to trust you. It stops spiraling in stress. It starts aligning with your principles. It becomes a place of peace, not conflict. And when that happens, your presence changes rooms. Your silence carries more authority than others' volume. Your calm becomes contagious. You become someone who leads not through domination, but through discipline. You lead not by force, but by example. And that kind of leadership is more rare and more needed than ever. A mind that is trained to stay cool under pressure becomes an asset not only for you, but for everyone around you. It lifts conversations instead of escalating them. It protects peace instead of disrupting it. It solves problems instead of creating more. So return to solitude. Return to breath. Return to your inner gym. There is no external success that can replace the strength of a mind at peace with itself. And the earlier you begin that training, the sooner the world will start to feel like a place you can respond to, not just survive in. In a world that rewards noise, being calm is a rebellion. When you train your mind, you don't just gain strength, you gain freedom. The freedom to respond instead of react. The freedom to think clearly when others are clouded. the freedom to walk through chaos without becoming part of it. You won't always control what happens outside. People will disappoint you. Plans will fall apart. Life will test your limits. But what you can control is how you meet those moments. And when your mind is trained, your silence becomes your strength. Your stillness becomes your strategy. And your presence, calm, clear, and unshakable, becomes a light for everyone else still stuck in the storm. Train your mind. Master your emotions, not to escape the world, but to rise above it.